I've got this presentation that I developed for the school district. They asked me to put this together, I think 6 years ago. And because there's so many new teachers, well, there's so many new people in the Comox Valley, what they wanted me to do is to provide an overview of some of these really commonly known or used places around the Comox Valley that like folks recreate at or drive by or look at every day, but probably don't understand sort of the Indigenous history or use or sort of cultural meaning of these places. So what I've done is put together basically a tour of I think 10 places, of which I think 2 I'm going to skip tonight to keep things moving along. And just talk about those places and how they would have been used in the past and how the people who lived here and used those places would have understood them. And so the title of my presentation is Cultural Topography of Traditional Indigenous Land Use at Pentlatch. And Pentlatch is the Comox Valley, so I always start with that, right? We're talking about this place here where we are now. The name of this place is Pentlatch. It's named after the Pentlatch people who used to live here. The language that they spoke was also called Pentlatch. So Pentlatch people, Pentlatch place, Pentlatch language, 3 answers to different questions. And that name, Pentlatch, was the name probably here for thousands and thousands of years until the Comox people moved down in the mid-19th century and it became known as Comox country. If you're reading like old Hudson Bay Company records and things like that dating to the 1830s, when these guys are talking about being in Comox country, they're really obviously in Quadra Island and Campbell River because that's where the Comox folks were at the time. So that was Comox country. And now this is Comox country, but it's really Pentlatch. We see this idea sometimes in local organizations that this is the land of plenty. Comox means the land of plenty. And it sort of does. Comox, to my understanding, means wealth and wealthy, right? And these folks were wealthy. But Pentlatch means satiated or buried belly. So it's that same idea that there's so much food here that you're just buried in it. So it is the land of plenty, but it's not really the land of plenty. It's really Pentlatch. So it's important to bear that in mind as we move forward. So here's the rough outline of the tour. I think I'm going to skip the medicine bowls, but we're going to move around to 10 different places here that folks are really familiar with. Some folks who aren't from here might not be familiar with, but they will be familiar with it by the end of the night. So before we get anywhere, and recall again, I built this presentation for teachers, assuming that they know nothing, not guardians who know this land pretty well and knew what their ancestors out and about doing, so bear with me a little bit. My fundamental point is that you can't understand how Indigenous people lived in coastal British Columbia, including Pentlatch, unless you can understand canoes and getting around by canoes and doing every single thing by canoes. Canoes were the traditional means of getting everywhere all the time for thousands and thousands of years here. People have been making canoes for at least these big dugout canoes for at least 3,000 to 5,000 years. They probably had other canoes before that as well too. These canoes were so important that every single village in coastal British Columbia and every single house in every village in coastal British Columbia is oriented on a canoe beach, right? A beach that you can land and drag a canoe up on. Just like every one of your houses has a driveway that goes to it, right? That's how we come and go every damn day. And it would just sort of be inconceivable to park your car at the bottom of a cliff and scurry up it, right? It's just the same as a canoe beach, right? That's a fundamental part of how you gotta live. So if you're gonna go fishing, you're gonna get in the canoe, put out your lines. If you're gonna go clamming, you're gonna get in the canoe with your digging stick and your baskets, get your clam. If you're gonna go hunting, you're gonna paddle as far as you can and then walk the last little bit, hunt and knock off a deer or elk or whatever and drag it back into your canoe. And that's the real benefit of these things. We can see this traditional dugout canoe there. This is in, I believe it's actually False Creek in Vancouver, like in the 1880s before Vancouver was a thing. And so we've got this large ocean-going Coast Salish style dugout canoe with 6 people in it. Grandpa at the front is just taking a nap and waiting for the tide to change so they can just paddle back out with ease. And so you can load 6 people in there and a couple tons of material, goods, food, whatever you want, and then go faster than you can as walking, right? So getting around by canoes is way more energy efficient than walking. You can go way faster, you can haul around a lot of stuff. So the folks that lived here, whether they're Coast Salish or Kwakwaka'wakw or whatever, as you move up and down the coast, they all had canoes and they all lived this basic lifestyle, right? Coming and going every day by canoes. It would be just the most natural thing in the world. You know, kids probably 5, 6 years old learning how to hop in the canoe and paddle around. So again, this photo here, these are some Squamish folks in a canoe. This is actually looking into North Vancouver. You can see how limited the amount of industry and settlement was there at the time. This is the 1880s. So fundamentally, you know, these canoes are watercraft and storage transport media. And the folks who would have lived in and around and by a canoe for hundreds of years, their entire lifetime, would have been perfectly comfortable shooting into the water, launching that canoe and getting wherever they need to go in any except for the worst possible circumstances, right? Really stormy weather, really crashing waves or something like that. Otherwise, this water wasn't a barrier, right? Like for us, we consider the water a barrier. We pull up to the ferry lineup and we sit for like 2 hours waiting for it to come towards us so we can finally just go over there, right? But if you have canoes and you're perfectly comfortable in canoes, you can zip around on that water fast and whenever you want, as long as the wind's not blowing too hard. So really important things. And it's not just that they're technologically, you know, sophisticated. These are complicated things. None of us here, well, maybe a couple of guys here could like whack out a canoe and just make it float without turning right or turning left or tipping over. But most people couldn't. You know, you've got to learn how to make a canoe from somebody else who's made a bunch of canoes. And you certainly didn't go to canoe school at VIU or anything to do so. You learn canoe making from your dad or your grandpa or your uncle or some other, you know, elderly male in that family. And you learn how to find the right tree, you learn how to knock that right tree down, hollow it out in the bush and drag it down to the beach, steam it open and put in those thwarts and then make these fantastic watercrafts. And the people that did this, the canoe makers, were always really high-ranking people because this is such a valuable skill, right? You imagine living in a community where you're the best at doing this, and everybody needs a canoe, right? Everybody needs a car. Every family had a canoe, probably 2, sometimes 3. If you're rich, you'd have one of these nice big ones, right? So some people were basically full-time canoe makers and were very high status and relatively wealthy because of that skill and that skill that they could bring back to their community and their families. So there's 2 sides to these skills from the Coast Salish perspective. There's the fundamental technical side, right? You learn how to adze the wood, you learn how to steam it open, you learn how to put those thwarts in. But this, from the Coast Salish perspective, is always mirrored with this spiritual side of ability, right? That you're not just fundamentally learning how to adze that wood from your uncle, but if you're going to be a good canoe maker, like a really good canoe maker, you're going to have the special spirit power that goes along with making canoes. And in the Coast Salish world, this is almost always woodpecker spirit, right? It's one of these animals that has that ability, that knows how to work the wood better than anything else. And for Coast Salish people, there's this strongly held belief that the world is inhabited by certain animals, beings, spirits that have the ability to gift this power and this knowledge to people. So people would go and fast and pray and bathe and dive in the water, make themselves pure and make themselves clean in the right places that they would know, that their family would train them to go to take on that spirit power, right? To gain that gift, to be visited by the woodpecker in a song or a dream or some sort of way that's gifted to you. And you never tell anyone about it, but then you take those powers back and you produce these magnificent canoes. So I'm dwelling on canoes a lot at the start here, but it's because they're important, right? So everywhere we're going to go tonight, except for maybe 2 places, we're going to get by canoe. And I make the argument that you can't wrap your head around how traditional societies worked here at all unless you can reorient your brain to getting everywhere you need to go by canoe.